Welcome to The Paradigm Shift on 4ZZZ 102.1, where we challenge the assumptions of our current society to resist depression and investigate alternative ways of living, for a world based on justice, solidarity and sustainability. Welcome to The Paradigm Shift on 4ZZZ 102.1 FM, your local community radio station. My name's Andy and I'll be hanging out with you for the next hour, broadcasting on Gaja and Turrbal country, and we will be talking more about that today on the show, because one, we should say it is almost NAIDOC week. Starting Sunday is always worth trying to celebrate Aboriginal and Islander culture. I personally believe that we should be really pushing for NAIDOC to be a national public holiday. Why not? We get a public holiday to celebrate white people coming to this country. Why not celebrate what happened before? And who wouldn't love an extra public holiday? But either way, there are lots of events happening and chance to take your time to celebrate all the things that these cultures have contributed to us, everybody who lives here. Of course, there's a lot of injustice and a lot of losses to mourn, and that should be commemorated as well. But also, it's worth celebrating. And the theme for NAIDOC Week this year is Keep the Fire Burning, Black, Loud and Proud. And at 4ZZZ, we love showcasing the voices of Aboriginal people of this city and beyond. And today on the show, we are going to be doing a show I've been meaning to do for a while. And it's certainly a question that a lot of people have been asking and discussing in recent months. The question is, what actually is the Aboriginal name for the Brisbane CBD area? For many years, it's been called Magan-djin by people trying to do the right thing and use the Aboriginal name. Going back a long time, I think the Magan-djin magazine started in Brisbane in the 1930s or something like that, using that word. But in more recent times, some people have been saying, look, it's not the right word. The right word is Magan-djin or Magan-djin, and the two people I speak to today on the show, Gaja, Kerry, Charlton, and Aunty Deb Sandy, both of whom are local Yagara traditional owners. They both say it is Magan-djin, although they slightly differ on pronunciation and where the word comes from, as we'll hear. But that's it, isn't it? We don't know for sure, and partly it's because all these things were intentionally wiped out. The language and the place names and the culture that went with it. You know, they wanted to take the land, and to do that, they wanted to take away people's connection to the land who might keep coming back there and getting in the way. And this week also, we did get a bit of a reminder of how our city came to be, the lovely, new world city metropolis that it is. On the 3rd of July, which was Wednesday, it was the anniversary of the hanging of Mullen and Nungaville, the first hanging in Queensland, and they were hanged for killing a white surveyor who had come to take their land. They were killed from the Spring Hill windmill. They were actually hung from the spokes of the windmill itself in front of a crowd of Aboriginal people there to mourn and presumably be taught a lesson of what would happen if they resisted the colonisation of their city. And it's notable that Spring Hill windmill is still in all kinds of historical tours of Brisbane, as I think it's one of the oldest surviving buildings in this city. But of course it is also a monument to how this city came to be the place it is now, and we should remember that. And so people were down there at the windmill on Wednesday bringing attention to that story. But today it'll be a bit more light-hearted than that. We'll just be chatting about language, about preserving language, and about what it means for traditional owners to have the rest of us who live in this place getting the language right. And so stay tuned. And I spoke to Gaja Kerry Charlton, who has been working on language repatriation. Let's have a listen to the first part of that interview.
Yawa, Yawa, hello, Numbly, Marumba Baron, Marumba Nyunyunyubu. So good day everyone and good morning. My name is Gaja Kerry Charlton. I'm a Guri from southeast Queensland. Guri is a Yagara language word for our people when we call ourselves Guri. Down south you've heard Kuri. Guri goes basically from Yagara country into Bundjalung. So the southern language country over the Logan River is Bundjalung. And so that goes down to nearly to the mid-coast down there. So Guri is spoken right through. My tribes are Jandaval and Kunpul from North Stradbroke Island, Kirkum from Brisbane, Kirgumbun from Brisbane, and Mudjimburra from West Yagara. And then so that's my Yagara, and then in my Gubby Gubby, also called Cubby Cubby, is Ngunda, which is commonly known as Yundunbi or Dundabari, also Nunakal, Nunigal. So they're all the terms that come out of the stem word Nyunda or Nyun. And that area is Nambour down to Redcliffe, Hayes Point before the Pine River, the mouth of the Pine River. And so that starts to give us our boundaries of our countries. I'm a mother of 3 remarkable adults and also raised 2 younger sisters and others. I'm now a grandmother of 13 and a great-grandmother of 4. Also, my family are Mortons, known as Morton, and that name came from the Moreton Bay settlement when my ancestors when their tribe was more intact in the CBD area, as they started needing English names for employment and other things. They adopted Morton. But before that, of course, we would have been Gurkum, and Gurkum is the tribe of my great-great-great-grandfather, who was Kerwally of Brisbane, Kerwally of Magan-djin. Kerwally later became known as King Sandy, or Jendi, as it should be pronounced, of Brisbane. And he married the Cubby Cubby woman, which is where the Nyunda Jundabari line comes in.
Now, you spoke a bit there about some of those traditional words for places and people, and this has been one of your focuses, is about getting these language and restoring it. And so can you tell us a bit about the Woolarungaroo language mapping project that you're a part of?
Yes, so Woolarungaroo is a historical language mapping project, and that came about late 2007. So Barry Brown is my language colleague, who's a Dugai fella, so a white fella who lives at Point Lookout on Stradbroke Island. So Barry had worked with the Morton family members who were all part of the CDP at Dunwich, or Gumpi as I should say, the original name of Gumpi. That's where my Jandaval tribe, that was their area, the central site of Chirangedi, Stradbroke Island, Chirangudi. So, which a lot of people know as Minjirribah, which is a historically imported word. I prefer Chirangiri, which is what I grew up hearing. So we realised to get to that next stage of fluency, we needed to compile more than just our language so that we had other languages to compare with and do linguistic surveys on. And so we began compiling a database of all the neighbouring languages, Bunjalung, Waka Waka, Yugambeh, Kabi Kabi or Gabi Gabi, even a bit of Gorang Gorang. So those language countries whose languages we have been compiling, we also have bloodlines to each of those. So we're careful to also follow our protocols and processes. And we've compiled a database of close to, about 35,000 words. Now, that sounds like a lot. It is a lot of words. But some of those words, of course, are written, 5 or 6 or 8 times, different ways. So we're doing linguistic surveys on that, and we were able to feel confident enough to produce our own language handbook, an introduction to the Yuggurabal language, the languages of Southeast Queensland. So what Woolloorangaroo has been doing is linguistically surveying, and in those different vocabulary groups, they can have a mixture of the 4 languages of Southeast Queensland. They can have languages from down south, up north, out west, maybe far east from the South Sea Islands. That's also part of our history. So that's the history of Woolloorangaroo.
In the last, 6 months or so, some of these ideas about languages in this part of the country have come into, I guess, kind of public discourse, and a lot of people have been talking about what is the correct name for the Brisbane CBD area. And you've been a prominent person saying that the correct name is Magan-djin. So for all of us who live in this city and are interested in this, could you tell us a bit more about this?
So I'm coming from a position of having been raised by the last old fluent speakers of Yuggera language. And so the older cousins and siblings of my generation in the Morton family were taught a lot of different bits of knowledge and information, and also language. And so when we look at the correct name of Brisbane, there's a framework that we have to look at to ascertain accuracy. So when you think about story of place, that can be a little bit different to name of place. And also there could be 6 ways that people will call Brisbane. So we've got Magan-djin, 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 Magan-djin. So you have to look at where did they all originate, what was happening at the time, the historical factors, and what was the customs, the cultural customs, what were the Guri cultural customs and protocols in place as well. I'm coming from a place of Guri perspective and Guri teachings. And I'm also in the last leg of my writing for my fellowship that I've been doing at UQ, transcribing and translating, though there was audio recorded of my very old people back in 1950 years to the 1960. Now, each of those language words have a significant meaning, and some of them would be words that are used in other contexts. So those names then, they're identified, that group, and also the clan names, and also your Yuri name, Yuri being totem, and people would not necessarily get a personal name unless they were very, very, very close to our traditional people, or also there were laws around it. So unless you had been through ceremony, done all of your initiations and fully completed in your status, you may not have been able to give your name to anybody else who wasn't on that same status. So there's some contributing to factors around how could some of the names get mixed up or muddled. So areas, of course, were named after something prominent on the site, and Magan-djin, that's the name that refers to that area, Brisbane district, Brisbane area, and Magan is our word for tulip wood tree, and Jin is the plural, or it's the pluralistic encompassing term of what's in that area. So we do know, and research has shown in the 1820s, it was prolific. Brisbane was prolific, of course, with trees and flora, and our people lived amongst all of that, and so there was many Magan. The word Magan-djin or Magan-djin, that comes from a different place. Magan is not our word. It is a word from further south. Magan, which means like a sharp spike for digging the ground, or sharp, long digging stick. And I know that some explanations has been that it's the name of Garden Point because of the spike shape in that area. Mind you, around the bend there's another spike shape, and around a few more bends there's other spike shapes. So none of them were named Magan-djin. One of the explanations was that it came from our people seeing the ground being dug up. So it was where ground was being dug. So, when you go right back into the history of it, our people had a different way of agriculture and practices with country. And so, I can understand them, whoever they were. So it had to be a Bunjalung or a Yugambeh person who called that spot Magan-djin. And another explanation is that then, because our people did do an elision of consonants between two vowels, and there's other grammatical rules with that, the g sound was very soft, so it may have morphed from Magan-djin into Magan-djin, and then over time become, with spelling, the different ways of spelling, Magan-djin. So there are a couple of examples of, I raised the questions about, did Magan-djin come from where the first convict garden was dug? And so all of this dugging and growing crops for food and food source, I believe that maybe one area had that name to start with, because at the time, you've got to remember, our people were still trying to figure out who were these white fellas come here, taking over, helping themselves, crashing through every law and protocol and customary practice at the time. So it's not our word. Magan is not our word. Magan-djin. I know that then more gardens very quickly started after the success of the one that was carefully attended to by the Commandant Logan at the time. So the names, it doesn't come from our cultural framework.
Just to clarify, I guess, does the understanding, the 20th century white person understanding that Magan-djin is the right name. That comes from Tom Petrie, is that right? Who was one white person who sort of made an attempt to kind of write down an Aboriginal language.
People were writing language before Tom Petrie got there. It would have been an imperative to get for the military to get some sort of intelligence about the people they were going to be dealing with and displacing. So language was being collected quite early. Tom Petrie did his best. Tom Petrie also spoke a mixture of languages, and he didn't fully understand all of the distinctions, but he was certainly a advocate, and I believe was somebody who was significant in the protection of the people with whom he had relationships, the Aboriginal people. And so he himself called it a different name to what we would call it. So he was a boy of 5 when they came in 1837 up from Sydney. His father was a superintendent of works. And I do know that Kerwally was part of the group working with Tom Petrie's father. You have to think of what was happening at the time. And at that time, it was very dangerous for our people. And guides were also being procured in very unethical manner. So it was at gunpoint or threats of death. So you have to think of what was happening at the time, because I know Andrew Petrie was trying to find trees for building, for ships, etc. There was this intentional strategic blueprint for possessing the lands, and there was opposition, a lot of opposition from our people. So it was dangerous times. I also think about that and think about, would I be happy telling my language to these people taking over my country? So we have that aspect as well. But certainly one of the early commandants got a good piece of language, which then was written up by Mitchell, and slowly more was written up. So Tom, in the 1840s, later 1840s, he was translating and in police investigations and things like that as well as a young fella. And then he went to live at Marumba Downs, which everyone knows as Marumba, but it's actually Marumba Downs, which means good place, good ground. So he was mainly very, very knowledgeable with Gubbi and what we know as Darrabul, the Darrabul people of Torble Point. And so the other contributing factors are that people were hearing very different sounds to their own language. You see that Yundanbi that I said, so my great-great-great-granny was Yundanbi, but people who were listening, that some of them wrote just UNDAMBI or UNDANBI, so they didn't hear the N sound, the NG sound. So this is where we get words like Agara or Ugarable or Undambi.
Yeah. What's the importance of people who live in the Brisbane area getting this name right? You know, what does it mean for traditional owners like yourself to have people using the right language to describe this place?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think that a lot of people want to know more about it, and that's a good thing, you know, that we can all get out there and have conversations about it and educate, and we're all on the same page. So I think it's like anywhere, isn't it? In this day and age now, when we've got we're in the, I think it's the third year of the United Nations decade of the world's Indigenous languages. So this work of revitalising and repatriating our languages has been really going for a couple of decades, for a few decades now. I got involved in the late 1980s, and before that it was just out of sight, out of mind for most of Australia. There were some groups in some areas that were lucky enough or blessed enough that the missions and missionaries encouraged them to continue speaking their language and practicing culture, whatever was possible. But what it led to with our languages in this area and other areas where it was more highly populated, or certainly underneath the government administration legislations, it was definitely a policy that the culture and language was not to be spoken or used, and also not to be passed down. So there's been a lengthy repair work that's had to happen and repatriating. So to have everyone learning about that and knowing correct place names, I think it's important. I mean, when you go to other countries, you're not going to a country where the capital city is named from a language from elsewhere. So I think we're probably getting with the times. We have to encourage people to read about what the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Human Rights and Cultural Rights of the World's Indigenous Peoples says. Because things are moving fast in this technological world, and we're still working on getting our language repatriated.
And for you personally, as somebody who has put in a lot of work into this job, what does it mean for you personally when you hear that there's been a change and people are wanting to use the term Magan-djin? How does that feel for you?
Well, I think it's respectful, and I think it helps with truth-telling and reconciliation. Look, how long ago did Ayers Rock get its original name back? And everybody says it. It's not an issue. You know, everybody's proud of it. And I think it brings pride to us. It's bringing, belongingship. I think it's just respectful. Like, it's respecting the fact that there were people here first, and there was a first language here for thousands of years, and it resonates with our spirituality of caring for the land, the country, and all that's in it. And I think it brings together and unites with a common cause. So I think there's so many positives. I teach language to kids, and we have a couple of songs and dances that we teach. And look, I love it, whether I'm working with adults teaching song and dance and language so that they're knowing names of the body parts, head, shoulders, knees and toes, all that in language, or totems, and we're dancing our totems together. We are practicing what was practiced here for thousands of generations. And we've all got a place in that and a role in that. That's where I come from. And it's respectful. It's not being hidden under the carpet. It's not outlawed any longer. When I was a child, we couldn't be openly doing anything because, we could have been removed from our families.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much, Gaja Kerry, for yarning with us today and helping to illuminate for us the language of this place that we live in.
You're very welcome, Andy. And listeners, let's get it. Magan-djin. Let's go and sit and talk on the jara on the ground in Magan-djin.
All right. Thanks, Gaja Kerry.
Thank you, Andy.
Gaja, Kerry, Charlton, talking about her language mapping project, and part of that is she has been actively pushing for people to use the word Magan-djin to talk about the city that we live in, and she gave in detail their explanation of why she thinks that's the correct term. Another person who has been for quite a few years pushing this is Aunty Deb Sandy, who is a Yagara elder and who often is doing Welcome to Countries, and she's often said that it is Magan-djin. They pronounce the two women pronounce it slightly differently, and as you'll hear in this, they have slightly different sort of ideas of where the phrase comes from. Aunty Deb goes with the often told story about the shape of the bend in the river being like a spike, whereas Gaja Kerry was saying that it's the tulip wood trees, Magan. I have heard somebody say that it could be both, that it's possible they made spears out of tulip wood tree and so it shared the name, and we're just talking about pronunciation differences. I personally don't really know, but anyway, we'll have a listen to Aunty Deb talking about, for her, why it's important to use the right word for this city that we live in.
Good morning. My name is Deborah Sandy, a traditional Aboriginal of Magan-djin, Brisbane, which is the traditional name for the Brisbane area. On north side, come from the Chipra people.
And today we are talking about what is the name for the Brisbane CBD area, and you've just said Magan-djin there. And we're also talking to Gaja Kerry Charlton on the show, who has said the same. In your upbringing as somebody who comes from this country, what makes you sure that the right name is Magan-djin?
Magan-djin is meaning like the shape of a spike, which is the river's bends. In particular to that area right there at the CBD, like Gardens Point, where the botanical gardens are, at the Magan. Yeah, so, the shape of the spike, meaning like a spearhead, the end, which is the bend of the river. So therefore at the Gardens Point you have the Magan right there, Magan-djin.
Yeah, a lot of people, I guess, over many years have been using the word Magan-djin, but you think that's not the right word?
Yeah, I don't believe it's, each to their own, and whoever come up with that, I would not have a clue.
But you didn't grow up, like your elders growing up, they didn't use that word, Magan-djin, they would always say Magan-djin?
Yeah, yes, Magan-djin, yeah. Magan-djin, I believe, is like from other sources, and I wouldn't know where it actually come from. But in tribal, back in the olden days, as people would refer to when they come into Brisbane, they would say, they're coming to Magan-djin. And those things are referenced and written down, yeah.
In recent months, there's been a real effort to try to get the right name for this place, and people really making an effort to start using Magan-djin. You've been saying for a long time in your speeches and Welcome to Countries and things that that's the right name, and obviously Gaja Kerry Charlton has been pushing it as well. What does it mean for traditional owners like yourself? Why is it important for people to use that right name?
Because it's the traditional Aboriginal name for the area, and going back to the original traditional Aboriginal name would mean like so much, a great deal of respect also in just restoring the traditional name back to its traditional name, Magan-djin, Brisbane, the same as Kerry. A lot of people still refer to it as the other name, but Kerry is the traditional Aboriginal name for the island, and it would be just, wow. It would be so nice to have the traditional name back, Magan-djin. Yeah. I guess I would have a celebration afterwards, if it does happen, Andy. I'd have a celebration. I think everybody would have a celebration. To have the traditional name recognised would be just incredible.
Yeah. I guess it's one of those things that we are seeing slow changes. I mean, Aboriginal people have lost so much of the land and of our culture and things like that. But getting these names back is a small thing. And do you think that it has other effects for Aboriginal people, whether it's traditional owners like yourself or other Brisbane blacks? Do you think that in amongst all the hurt and all the different issues, do you think that using the right name does have an effect on people's lives?
Yes, you're right to exactly all the words that you spoke. It would be just the right thing to do, to have it changed back to its traditional name. As people always say, always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And the lands were forcibly taken. The people were dispossessed of their land and were dispossessed of their country, and to have the traditional name restored would be just the right thing to do. There's no other words to explain that. It would be just the right thing to do, is to restore back to Magan-djin, the traditional Aboriginal name for Brisbane.
Thanks very much for chatting with us today, Aunty Deb.
Yeah, you're most welcome, Andy.
That is Aunty Deb Sandy, who has over quite a few years, I've heard her saying that the correct name for the Brisbane CBD area is Magan-djin. We heard Gaja, Kerry, Charlton earlier on say it's Magan-djin, so maybe we're still not totally clear, but I think both these women, local elders, both are adamant that it's not Magan-djin, although over the years people have the best intentions in trying to use the Aboriginal word for the city and calling it Magan-djin, but we're slowly changing now, and the spelling as well is being worked out as we try to figure out how to honour the people that came before us in this place. There's a bit of action on the text line. A few people have been engaging, and it is a question that a lot of people have been asking and talking about, particularly this year. I think Gaja, Kerry put the word on a few political groups in this city about who had the name Magan-djin in there, and so it's been changed and it's brought into discussion. And I think one of the things it is, of course, only the CBD area, possibly even more localised than that, the Gardens Point area where Parliament is and the Uni and the Botanic Gardens is the actual place that is the Magan-djin area. And of course many of our other suburbs actually do have Aboriginal names as well, and it's worth looking into the names of the places where you live. I mean, I live on the south side and near the Brisbane River, and the place where I live is probably, the Aboriginal name is probably Yeronga, which is of course one of the suburbs there, and I think it means sand, Yeronga. But all across the city there are Aboriginal words and Aboriginal language, and as both these women have said, it does make a difference. It probably makes a difference to us in how we relate to this city that we live in, how we think about it, to make sure we're using those names. We remember, of course, that people lived here before, and that there's sort of injustice that has led to us having access to this beautiful sunny place that we get to call home, and that there's a bit of work to do to restore that injustice, and it makes a difference to Aboriginal people as well. Both of them said that it's a sign of respect, and it goes some way to healing and making a better Brisbane going forward. Also, the tulip wood trees, it'd be worth looking it up and noting where they are. If this is the tree that our city's named after, it's worth going and having a look. Marky did send in Brisbane tulip wood is the Latin name Harpullia pendula, and there are a few different tulip wood trees in our area, and Aboriginal people, of course, they were very conscious of their use of resources, and that's why they named places after plants and things like that. And we could do with doing that as well, being conscious of the natural resources of our city and how we're using them and how we're restoring them, and enabling all species to flourish around us. So I guess that's a good thing as well about using this word and thinking about what it means. And somebody's asked about the spelling. The way it's normally being spelt at the moment is Magan-djin. So a lot of Aboriginal words. There's multiple spellings for them, but that's what we're going for at the moment. It seems as a consensus, and I assume that one comes from Gaja, Kerry, that spelling. So glad to see people engaging with the show and engaging with the Aboriginal history of. That's all we have time for on The Paradigm Shift. We'll be back. I'll see you next week.